Hello, I'm Priyanka and I'm going to be talking about oral and non-verbal communication in China. First, I'm going to give you an overview of the topics that I'm going to be speaking about. For oral communication, I'm going to be talking about the communication style, conversations, telephone etiquette, compliments, and the way people address each other in China. Under nonverbal communications, I'm going to be talking about haptics or touching behavior, oculesics or eye contact, and kinesics or body language. Let's have a look at the communication style in China. Chinese communication characteristics are largely impacted by traditional Confucian values. Confucianism is an ethical and philosophical system developed from the teaching of the Chinese philosopher Confucius. The key aspects of Confucianism are relationship, face, politeness, humility, and codes of etiquette. The key aspects, the five distinct characteristics of Chinese communication are implicit communication, listening-centered communication, polite communication, insider communication, and face-centered communication. In Chinese, Han means to contain, to embody, or to reserve, and Zu means to store or to save. The Chinese approach to communication is implicit and indirect. To be Hansu, one does not spell out everything but leaves the unspoken to the listeners. Chinese tend to use small modifiers to condition their meanings. The frequent use of perhaps and maybe in Chinese is one example. If the Chinese say, maybe I will come with you, they actually mean I'm coming. If they say perhaps it is too far for you to walk, they actually mean there's no way I'll let you walk. And if they use the word inconvenient, they actually mean impossible. Chinese culture encourages listening, not speaking. To Chinese, there are conditions associated with speaking, and not everyone is entitled to speak. Thus, a spoken voice is equated with seniority, authority, age, experience, knowledge, and expertise. As a result, listening becomes a predominant mode of communication. The traditional Chinese wisdom disaster comes by way of the mouth suggests that the more one speaks, the more mistakes one makes. The term keiki means behavior of guest, or in a general sense, polite, courteous, and modest. It is a basic principle that is observed in daily Chinese communication. The Chinese use respected terms to address each other and use imposing behavior to show their politeness. For example, at the dinner table, the host tends to open even a luxury dinner party by saying, "Today you are invited to a very simple meal. Help yourself, please." Or today, the dishes are not so well prepared. There's nothing delicious. Chinese tend to become highly involved in a conversation with someone they know, but they rarely speak to strangers. The type of relationship is a critical dimension in Chinese communication process. The nature of the relationship determines what is communicated and how much information should be transmitted. Face is at the center of Chinese social psychology. Face involves respect for a person with good moral reputation as well as his or her prestige. Those who do not follow this code of conduct are considered as losing face and bringing shame on themselves. Therefore, saying no and being negative are discouraged in Chinese communication. Let's now look at the kind of conversations which the Chinese people are most involved in. In the West, it is often rare that the conversational topics are based on personal matters unless the parties are intimately associated. Opening conversational topics in China rather tend to be more personal. It is common for Chinese to ask some private questions regarding one's age, salary, or marital status. If the parties involved in a conversation are already acquainted, questions regarding a person's family life, children, or work are fairly common. Whether or not they can talk about each topic in more detail depends on their personal relationship. Another good conversational opener would be to ask about the place where a person was born and to then discuss about his or her hometown. The conversation can then lead to discussing more about the town's location, the cuisine, the dialect, the regional customs, crops, and industries. Chinese love to talk about their hometowns. Conversational opening could also depend on the venue. So when having a meal with a Chinese acquaintance, one could ask questions about Chinese food since China has many distinct regions, each with its own unique cuisine. Before meetings, it is however better to learn some common Chinese expressions like hello, thank you, and goodbye. It is also considered a good practice to have some knowledge of Chinese culture, history, and geography. Small talk is welcomed in the beginning, the middle, and the end of a meeting. During the meeting, a confident tone is highly preferred, and one should make sure not to speak too fast. It is advisable not to ask the Chinese about their income, their budget, or money spending habits. Also, it may not be advisable to introduce discussions of a deeply political nature. Most Chinese are ready to share their experiences about the Cultural Revolution and the changes that have taken place in China since China's reform and open door policy, but care must be taken to avoid topics related to politics, Taiwan, and Tibet. Also, one should never refer to China as Red China or Communist China. Silence can be used as a time to contemplate or as a negotiating tactic in China. It is not necessarily a negative signal. It is a sign of politeness and of thought. One must allow for longer wait time before speaking than might be appropriate in many Western countries. In a formal setting, it is polite not to interrupt a Chinese person who is speaking. The following infographic shows the difference between the telephone etiquettes in US and the telephone etiquettes used in China. Phone etiquette is governed by strict rules in the professional settings in the United States. Cell phones are to be silenced and ignored when in meetings. In China, cell phone etiquette is very different. Cell phones get answered at dinner, at a wedding, or in the middle of a business meeting. The caller will let the phone ring for at least 10 to 15 times, and if left unanswered, he or she will call right back. The Chinese do not rely on or use messaging or voicemail, and it is rare that anyone will have an answering machine in their house. The expression long time no talk is a common Chinese expression used in telephone encounters with friends or acquaintances. Voice recognition comments like "you recognized me, finally" serve interpersonal functions by acknowledging, praising, and promoting relationships between conversation partners. Typical telephone farewells among the Chinese are seemingly abrupt. One may be left holding a dead receiver in astonishment. All one could hear is goodbye and then a click. R. Chen in 1993 conducted a contrastive study on compliment responses between the Americans and the Chinese. The responses by the Americans were categorized into 4 categories. They would either accept the compliments as is, or they would return the compliment saying something like, "Your shirt looks good too," or they would reflect upon the compliment saying, "Thank you, my mom gave it to me," or they would reject the compliment, which is quite rare among the Americans. The Chinese responses were grouped into 3 categories. They would either reject the compliment, like saying, "I'm older and uglier," or they would thank and denigrate the compliment, saying, "Thank you, but the sweater is not that nice." Acceptance of compliments by the Americans is based on the agreement maxim, which is described as minimizing disagreement between self and others and maximizing agreement between self and others. Similarly, the rejection of compliments in Chinese is motivated by the modesty maxim, which is described as minimizing praise of self and maximizing dispraise of self. The functions and meanings of exchanging compliments are different in the American and Chinese cultures. In American culture, compliments serve as a conversation opener. However, in Chinese culture, compliments are used as genuine praise. Americans compliment more frequently on appearance or possessions, while Chinese compliment more frequently on ability or performance. Chinese verbal greetings are different from American formal greetings in that a Chinese verbal greeting includes speaking an individual's surname followed by their title so as to show recognition of that individual's social class and rank. It is fine to address a person with generic titles like Master or Mr. or Madam, or by using official or professional titles. For example, if the person has the surname Lee and he heads the company that one is talking to, he may be addressed as Lee Zong, meaning something like Boss Lee. If he's a professional, such as an engineer or a business consultant, one can either address him by using his profession or respectfully address him as Lao Shi, which means teacher, even when he's not an educator. Let's now look at a few aspects of non-verbal communication in China. Chinese people use more touching between family members and close friends with whom they have an intimate or very personal relationship. The Chinese, especially those who are older and in positions of authority, dislike being touched by strangers. In the business context, it is best to avoid physical contact with members of the opposite sex altogether. In the business context, however, a handshake is acceptable. While a firm grip between hands is expected in the United States, the Chinese employ a gentler handshake, as explained by the picture on the left. It is advisable to wait for the Chinese counterpart to initiate a handshake. Backslapping, kisses, and bear hugs are considered as inappropriate. Members of the same sex may hold hands in public in order to show friendliness, but unlike in the Western culture, public displays of affection between the sexes are frowned upon. In the United States, one expects to maintain eye contact when talking with people. On the contrary, because of the more authoritarian nature of the Chinese society, steady eye contact is viewed as inappropriate, especially when subordinates talk with their superiors. Eye contact is sometimes viewed as a gesture of challenge or defiance. Traditionally, it was considered impolite and aggressive to look directly into another's eyes while talking. Let's take a look at the kind of gestures that are used in China. The Chinese avoid making expansive gestures and using unusual facial expressions. They do not use their hands when speaking, and they use their entire hand rather than a single finger to point towards someone or something. Shaking one's fist at someone indicates anger. Here is an interesting example of how the same gesture can have different meanings in different cultures. For example, stamping one's foot. In North America, it could be as a sign of impatience, whereas in China it could mean anger, irritation, frustration, or remorse. Similarly, another gesture, for example, like pat on the head, could mean giving comfort, consolation, or encouragement and affection in North America, whereas in China, adults may pat heads of children. Patting the head of teenager or adult would be insulting in China. Finger snapping in North America might be used to attract attention or to mean hurry up, but in China, it could mean as an insulting gesture. This was the end of the screencast for oral and non-verbal communication in China. I hope you all enjoyed listening to it. Thank you so much for your attention.